Hi, this is Anthony from MakeWeirdMusic.com, and today we're here with Michael Manring. Michael, part of the purpose of the site is to introduce musicians and music enthusiasts to new kinds of music and new musicians. So I thought it'd be cool if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little about your musical history and what got you to where you are today.
First of all, thank you so much for doing this, for helping those of us who make weird music to get out there and connect with the folks who are interested in this kind of stuff, because it's not for everybody.
Right.
And it can be a challenge to kind of cut through all the other information that's out there. Mm-hmm. People who have really big budgets to spend to get to promote what they do. So we really appreciate homegrown support for guys like us. And I know you've talked to a lot of my friends. So awesome. We're kind of a team in that way. But yeah, my name is Michael Manring, and I fell in love with the bass guitar when I was 10 years old. And it just got hold of me, and there's something about it that just really spoke to me and has never let go. I didn't really... I always kind of wanted to be a rock star when I was a kid. I thought that would be really fun, just because that's all I knew that you did with the bass guitar. But as I got older and kind of learned a little bit about the music business, I didn't really think I fit into, professional musician kind of personality. And so I kind of wanted to be a music teacher, and I kind of headed in that direction. But I just kept getting gigs and doing a lot of stuff. And for a while, I got really interested in music therapy. And I really pursued the idea of being a music therapist for a while. And everybody just said to me, oh, no, don't do that. You're better off being a player. Mm. There's no money in it, and it's an untested field, and, you work really hard, and you don't know what's going to happen. It's really very, very sketchy, so you're better off being a player. Actually, as it turned out, music therapy is a really blossoming field, and there aren't enough people, and it generally pays pretty well. So it was just one of the many career turns that I probably should have been more intelligent about. But things have worked out okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just love music. I love playing music, and I love playing for people, and so it's actually been okay.
So tell me about that transition. Like, who did you listen to that made you think, I want to play the bass, I want to be a rock star? Mm-hmm. And then, were there musical influences, or was it just kind of an organic development of who you were and learning more about the industry that made you shy away from that rock star element?
The first thing that we all kind of got into, all the kids in my neighborhood got into, was the record Woodstock. Mm. We're all a little young for the Beatles phenomenon. We knew about the Beatles, but it just didn't connect. At that point, we were kind of more into younger kid things. But Woodstock really kind of grabbed us all, and we were all fascinated by it. And one of the things about that was there's a lot of different kinds of music at Woodstock. Jimi Hendrix was there, but also Ravi Shankar and Sha Na and Richie Havens, just all kinds of stuff. And for me, at least, and I think for some of my friends too, that was part of the appeal. It's this whole world of different things going on. And there was kind of a lot to learn, where's this come from, and what is this doing, and how did these people get to what they're doing? And that was a real fascination. So the first thing I was into was just kind of everything. Just kind of got into listening to all of it, trying to figure out what it was. And for me, the bass was sort of the common thread through it all. I just loved the sound. And at first, I didn't know what the sound was, actually. So as a younger kid, I always loved the sound of the bass, but there wasn't a lot of information about music in those days. So you'd hear something, you'd hear a sound, and as part of an ensemble, you don't even know what's making what. And there wasn't a lot of music video in those days either. So it took me a while to figure out that it was bass, but by the time Woodstock came out, that kind of information was much more available, and you knew who the players were and what they were playing, and so that's what really got me into it. And really, anything with a bass on it was something that was fascinating to me, and even stuff without bass. But bass was the thing that most tied it together. And so, yeah, the Hendrix was big early on, and The Who, but also Steppenwolf and Grand Funk Railroad, and Sly and the Family Stone was really a huge inspiration to me. That was one of the many times in those days that I heard a song and just loved it. And finally somebody said to me, that part right there, that's the bass playing that part. And going, oh my God, really? That's a bass? That is so cool. So those guys were kind of the original inspiration. But I got pretty quickly into jazz as well, and got fascinated by all that, and then got into classical music and contemporary music and avant-garde music and different folk musics, and just kind of soaked it all up, and just wanted to be part of that. And it was, as I got older, when I got to be 17, 18, I started seeing how the music industry works, and that it's, how can one say politely, it's good in the music business if you're, if you're not an introvert, let's say that. Right, yeah. If you're an extrovert, that's really a good quality. And I kind of struggle with that. For me, I'm, really, really happy just sitting in my room and playing music, always have been. But getting out there and marketing myself is not a skill I have. And in fact, it's hard for me to even think that way. So that made me think that, maybe that's not the best career choice for me, because that's always going to be a struggle. I met a lot of people who are just really good at that. And a lot of them just naturally so. Really impressive when you meet somebody like that. There's a tendency to kind of look down on that skill, I think, the skill of being able to market yourself. But I know quite a number of people for whom it's just a natural ability and it's not forced, and I've always admired those people. But that's not a skill I ever had.
Yeah, that's a very tough one.
It is. But it's nice when you meet people who are good at it, especially when they're great musicians as well. And they're just kind of honestly able to share with you the excitement about their own music. Mm.
And when did you start becoming a professional bass player?
I started doing professional gigs in high school, actually. In fact, I was asked to join a professional big band, like a jazz band, in high school with guys. I would have been by far the youngest person in the band. And I did a lot of gigs with those guys, and they wanted me to join. But I had to say no, because we would, go out and do a gig in the general area, but, might be a gig 3 hours away. So I'd get home at 2 in the morning and then have to get up at 7 to go to school. And that was a little rough. And I didn't want to quit school. I did pretty well in school, actually, and I wanted to, at least for high school, I wanted to finish. So I started playing professionally at a pretty young age, and just kind of kept going. After high school, I went to Berklee School of Music, and I stayed there for an academic year. But I got a gig. I was doing a lot of gigs there as well, and I got a gig on the road at the end of my academic year at Berklee, and went on the road playing music. So, and I've been playing music ever since, professionally.
Who was the first touring gig with?
I guess the first touring gig was probably that big band, actually.
Okay.
Where we weren't really touring, it was kind of local, but we'd go out.
So you were playing regularly with that big band after your first year, which led to other opportunities.
Yeah, I did that while I was in high school, but kind of had to back out of it just because I couldn't finish high school and do that at the same time. It was too much. But right out of Berklee, I went on the road playing top 40 music, which was, in those days, it was disco. So, we wore the platform shoes and shiny shirts with collars that went out to here. They're aerodynamic. And we played Boogie Oogie Oogie and Disco Inferno, stuff like that. And that band was, that was a road band. We all lived in different cities, and so there was no home to go to. So we were on the road always. You usually play at a week or maybe 2 weeks in one place, most typically hotels, a hotel ballroom or their little hotel disco club. And then we would travel on a Sunday to the next place and then play there. And I did that. I lasted about, I guess it was 6 or 8 months just doing that on the road. But it got pretty tedious pretty fast.
Musically or contextually with business-related things?
The worst part about it for me was, since we played like 5 sets a night or something. I really couldn't practice very much.
5 sets?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was a lot of playing. So there, it was kind of, I would practice for a couple hours in the day, but it was kind of burnt out from playing. So I wasn't really making much musical progress. And for me, that was the hardest part of it. And I did have to, come to terms with the fact that I really wasn't that interested in the music. I mean, I love playing, and it's always fun to play any kind of music. But, when you're playing the same tunes night after night, every night.
With no improvisational opportunities.
Yeah, well, it was kind of a nice band because we were all Berkeley people.
Okay.
So everybody in the band could play, and everybody could play jazz. And when they let us get away with it, we would. But we got fired from a couple of gigs for that very thing, which is
3 sets in.
Yeah, that was, and being on the road, that was not pretty because you were completely dependent on whoever hired you for even for your meals. So if you got fired, you didn't eat. So that was a little.
Tell me about your musical progress then. You're evolving as a musician, you're listening to jazz, you listen to a lot of genres, you go to Berkeley for a year, and then you're playing with a disco band.
Yeah.
So obviously you have to change some priorities.
Yeah.
What did that look like, and what did you do after you left that band?
So my education in music was mostly jazz. So that's kind of how I learned about music. Even though I was playing upright a lot in those days too, I kind of had to give up upright after going on the road with the disco band because I couldn't take my upright for that gig, and obviously that was not welcome there. So unfortunately, my classical music career was pretty brief, which is probably for the best because I never got very good at the upright. Because I was really interested in playing classical music on the upright with the bow, but it's a huge commitment, and I didn't seem to be making the progress I wanted to. But yeah, so the background in jazz was really helpful. There's 2 ways to think about jazz. You can think about it as an idiom, which means you're thinking about the kind of phrases that are used in jazz and the kind of rhythms that are used in jazz. But jazz can also be looked at as academically. So in order to be able to play jazz, you have to understand music in a remarkably comprehensive way. And looked at in that way, I mean, it's just a great musical education. Because if you're looking at it that way rather than as an idiom, if you can understand and play jazz in that sense, you can almost play any kind of music. Because you kind of have this nuts and bolts understanding of how things work. And you can apply that to any other form that you find yourself in. And so then it's a matter of just trying to adapt to the other idioms. Adapting to other idioms can be very, very challenging. So that can be a big part of it. But at least you can understand the fundamentals of music, what notes can be played and how you can play them, that kind of stuff. So that was really helpful. The education I got at Berkeley was really helpful in that way. And it allowed me to kind of pursue this dream of trying lots of different things. So after Berkeley, and then after I left the disco band, pretty quickly I joined an original fusion band in Washington, D.C. And that was great. That was a lot of fun. And in those days, we played about 3 gigs a week playing original fusion music, which was amazing. I don't think you could do that now.
Yeah, paid gigs?
Paid gigs?
That's amazing.
I mean, we weren't making
Right.
much money,
Right.
you know, kind of all living in our parents' basements. But, you know, we were getting by. And, you know, you could afford to have a car and, you know, do okay. And we got signed to Tappan Zee Records, which was I think it was a CBS offshoot in those days. It was owned by Jay Chataway and Bob James, I think. And so we worked on a record, and local studio, really good studio in the area, was backing us. And so they gave us all their off studio time. So that tended to be, people didn't tend to work there between, say, 8 p.m. and 10 a.m. And so we would often have run of the place all night long. And that was great. So I started to learn how the studio works, and started to learn how to work in the studio. And that was definitely eye-opening and a good experience. So we spent ridiculous amounts of time working on our record. And as is often the case, that only made it sound worse. But it was a great learning experience,
Right.
you know. And the record company, Tappan Zee, folded just before we finished the record. So we did all that recording, you know, not for naught, certainly, but the record never came out officially. We, you know, recorded, I think, cassettes and sold them to our friends and gave a lot of them away. But that was fun. And so then after that band, when the record company folded and, you know, things were changing and started to get kind of harder to find gigs, we kind of saw the writing on the wall that being an original fusion band was maybe didn't have as much future in it as we all hoped. So we disbanded, and I moved to New York, and to be a starving artist there instead.
But it was a lot cheaper then to be in New York.
In New York, it was cheaper then. I mean, I think it was still the most expensive place in the country, so it was still a challenge. And you know, the thing about New York then is it was really, really rough. And where I lived was really, really rough. I mean, I got beat up. And
What years were this?
this was, I moved there, I think, in 82, 83,
Okay.
around in that time. So it was a hard place to be. But it was amazing. I mean, New York just, it still is amazing, but in those days, everybody basically on the East Coast who was creative kind of ended up in New York. It's kind of the way it worked.
Yeah, the kitchen
The
there.
kitchen was just getting started.
David
yeah.
Byrne,
Yeah.
The Residents,
Yep.
Laurie Anderson,
Yep.
amazing acts played there all the time.
Yep.
For cheap.
Yep. Yep. That's right.
So you were there in that
I was
time?
there, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and couldn't afford to go to a lot of the cool stuff that was going on, but
Right.
you know, it was around a lot of it. And there was an amazing art scene as well. Keith Haring, you know, you'd see Keith Haring paintings that would just appear overnight.
Banksy of that time, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. And I was involved a lot in dance, the dance world. One way of making a very small amount of money as a musician is to accompany modern dance classes. Yeah. Some people know about that. And I used to love doing that and working with dancers and writing music for choreographers. And the dance scene was amazing then. And it was great to be just in such a creative place. Jaco Pastorius was there then too, and he was my idol at that point. He just, you know, absolute borderline worship, I guess. And that was neat because I could see him play often, and I, would bug him whenever I felt like I could get away with it, bug him with lots of questions. And he finally said, well, just come for lessons. And so I took some lessons with him as well. And so that was kind of a good experience.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Do you want to explore that a little bit, or?
Sure. It was kind of complicated because it was an incredible opportunity to get to spend time with him and, see him play often and sit down and play music with him, because he was such an idol and such a hero to me. But it was difficult also because he was such a mess. Mm-hmm. It was hard to be around him because he was in so much just personal turmoil. And, he was very ill. And that's probably the cause of all of his very, very bizarre behavior. He was extremely self-destructive. Mm. I'm not sure I ever met anybody who was quite that self-destructive. It's amazing he lived as long as he did.
Wow.
Because he was a kind of person who would do something really stupid for no reason. Jump down a flight of stairs or, hit himself in the head with a beer bottle. Just, okay. And so that was hard for me that there was this person who I so wanted to be, but he didn't want to be himself. He didn't want to be.
Wow. Yeah.
So that was a really complicated conundrum for a 22-year-old
How long were you taking lessons from him?
It was very intermittent, off and on, for a couple of years while I was there, maybe two years. He was sort of by choice. He was often homeless. It was very hard to get in touch with him, even when he had an address or a phone number. So you kind of never knew what was going to happen. And maybe he'd say, hey, show up at this place tomorrow and we'll do a lesson, and he wouldn't show up. So it was very sort of sketchy, and sometimes I'd just meet him at a gig and he'd say, here, let me show you this, and he'd show me some random thing. But it was, I still feel just so bad for him. Mm-hmm. Because he had a terrible reputation, especially in New York. An awful reputation. And, I guess it was deserved, I went to a lot of gigs where he wouldn't show up for, and gigs where he would walk off the stage, and gigs where he would try to get in a fight with one of the other band members or the bartender or somebody, and, so you can understand why people didn't think highly of him.
Sure.
And I saw him be very, very mean and rude to a lot of people, but he was very, very kind to me, really kind to me, and we had wonderful conversations. Underneath all that he was really smart guy. He knew everything about music. And we would sit and talk about Bartók and Chopin and Stravinsky, and he was very supportive to me, often especially when it was just the two of us. He liked to just sit and play together a lot, and we'd play, jazz standards usually. And when we were done, he'd slap me on the back and go, "Oh man, you're the best on earth," which was not true, definitely not true, especially compared to him. But I think he knew I was a nervous kid who was uncertain and was just trying to be nice, and he thought maybe, I guess, that I had some potential. And I would pester him with millions of questions, and he was always very patient about doing his best to answer them. He had trouble concentrating a lot. So you just had to keep, come on back, reeling him back in. There's a lot of that. But he was never really rude about that, at least not with me. And if I asked him a lot, like specific parts, when you played this line, and, in the piece of Avona, when you played this, how did you phrase it? How did you finger it? And he'd generally get really spacey for a minute, and then you bring him back and say, oh, right, this is how I did it. And there's a lot of stuff that he didn't remember or didn't think about. So there's a lot of things I asked him like that. And he'd say, I never thought about it. And I asked him to play it for me, and he'd play it. And I'd say, it seems like you're doing this. Is that right? And he'd say, yeah, I guess that's right. Mm. And oddly, he really wanted to teach. He had this dream of having a bass school. One of his pet peeves was that if you're a bass player, there was no Chopin and Scarlatti and Beethoven sonatas to work on and to allow you to kind of advance your craft. And he kind of wanted to start that process, but he was, as I say, he just had such trouble focusing that that just was never going to happen. So it was interesting. It was interesting, and especially being in New York at that time when it was just so dark and so dangerous.
I lived on Long Island as a kid, and I remember going to the city. It was, don't look up because people will know you're a tourist and you'll get mugged, and I was terrified of New York City as a kid.
Yeah, I had a lot of bad things happen.
So not long after that, you started getting involved with Michael Hedges and Windham Hill.
Yeah.
How did that happen, and can you tell us some of those experiences?
Yeah, that was really great. So the music in New York in those days reflected the sort of darkness of the social scene. So the kind of music we were doing, was playing a lot of dark, heavy, complicated music. There were just amazing musicians there then, as there are now, as there always have been. And so I got to play with some people who were just really, really high-level musicians. But the whole thing was just, it felt so heavy. And in those days, I was getting really interested in bass as a solo instrument, in the possibilities for that. I had discussions with Jaco about that as well. And when I talked to people in New York about that, I got a lot of very, very blank stares. I think one of the things about New York in those days is there was a lot of artistry, but you kind of had to fit into one of the available boxes. So you kind of had to be a jazz musician or a fusion musician or a avant-garde musician. Those were three places that I liked a lot. I was kind of interested in all those things and some of the other things as well. I liked all those worlds. But there wasn't a lot of crossing between them. They were sort of, the lines were pretty clearly defined. And I was never really comfortable with that. As soon as there was a line kind of drawn in the sand, the first thing I wanted to do was cross over it or erase it entirely. And that didn't go over so well in New York. And the idea of wanting to be a solo bassist was kind of like that too. Well, nobody's ever done it, so it's not something that can be done, which is not the way I think. I think, well, nobody's ever done it, so maybe it's a good idea. Sort of the way I think. And I had already started working with Michael Hedges when I lived in New York. I'd known him for a couple of years, even. I met him before I moved there, I think, or maybe about the time I moved there. And when I met Hedges, he was not the Michael Hedges that we all came to know. He wrote his own music, but it's mostly pop music. I don't know if when I met him, he had maybe written one or two guitar instrumental pieces, but that was about it. But he looked like Neil Young, and he loved Neil Young, and he sounded like Neil Young, and he made a meager living playing Neil Young songs in bars every night. But he was studying contemporary and electronic music composition at Peabody Conservatory. So he had this really super high-level musical mind, but loved playing pop music. And so, we hit it off, immediately. We definitely saw eye to eye. He was definitely a person who did not want to fit into one box or another.
Right.
And so we became fast friends, but, we were both, starving musicians at that point, and we both hadn't developed much of an independent, recognizable sound. I mean, it's funny, in those days, there was kind of a circle of our friends that was we were all music heads. And Michael was by no means considered the best guitar player in our circle. In fact, he was sort of kind of down low on the rungs. Because that group, everybody looked up to probably Pat Martino, more than anybody else. Pat Martino was, and with good reason, just amazing, amazing player. And so all the guitar players, and some of those bass players too, wanted to be able to play like Pat Martino. And Michael couldn't really do that. It's weird. He had all the understanding to do that, and all the brain power to do that, and more. But somehow he just, it didn't connect with him. It was kind of odd. And especially since he ended up studying with Pat Martino. And right about the time he died, he started to be able to play like Pat. He started to be able to play in that way, kind of with his own style. He was really interested, when he died, he was kind of trying to go in some new directions. And he was playing a lot more electric guitar and playing sort of in of his own version of that way. It was really neat. It's a shame that he didn't get to see that through, because it could have been really cool what he was coming up with in that way. But in those days, that kind of style wasn't connecting with him. But he had all this amazing musical talent and skill and understanding. And so instead, he kind of went this other direction. Instead of kind of working toward playing these the sophisticated single note lines, very interesting harmonically, he kind of did the opposite. He played very orchestrally, slower music, and simpler harmonically. He tended to play music that was relatively simple harmonically, or maybe just more open harmonically, less chromatic, maybe you could say, and develop that into this amazing art form. And so, what a privilege to get to spend time with him and watch him going from being, a real copycat to being a real original. Watch him make that go through that process and kind of go through it with him, because that whole period, we would have these long talks about music and life and stupid things as well. But
yeah, so what about your development? You went from disco band to fusion, which isn't nearly as quiet as what you did with him, and what you've done as a solo bassist. It's kind of funny for me, knowing a lot of your solo music outside of Thonk, to hear you talking about being in these kind of rock sort of instrumentation bands, and yet your solo music is so quiet. And what you've done with Michael Hedges, that was so quiet. How did you end up taking your technique, which is, I tell everyone it's extraterrestrial.
Thank you.
I like that you find that a compliment. That's exactly what I mean. But can you talk about your evolution? He's coming from a Neil Young context. You're coming from fusion and disco, and he's probably had his rock stuff. And then you guys become the faces for like new age music and a new, very soft sound.
Yeah, it was it was wonderful, and it was especially wonderful to have a compadre in that process. We actually came from sort of similar backgrounds, although you're right, mine was a little bit more sort of Sly and the Family Stone, Led Zeppelin, and Wayne Shorter, where his was a little bit more Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and Jethro Tull. He was a big Jethro Tull head, but I was a fan of all those people as well.
Right.
It was just more, that's what we fell into, I think. And but we both had come from, rock music backgrounds. Rock music was sort of the gateway drug, I think, for a lot of us into music. In fact, we both were huge fans of Van Halen when we met. That was one of the things that we really, I think within the first 2 minutes of our first conversation, we talked about Anton Webern and Eddie Van Halen and Joni Mitchell, I think, and realized, okay, we're going to have to hang. So yeah, it was a fascination with all these things, and kind of youthful stupidity and enthusiasm, where you're just really into all of it, and not, probably didn't have as much common sense about kind of weeding through the good and bad as we should have, actually. But at that age, that's probably a good thing, And we're just thrilled by all of it, and we both really we dreamed, I guess I should say, about creating our own approach. That was the dream. It doesn't seem to be as much the case in music now. I don't know if you find that's true, but for a lot of us in those days, that was the holy grail, if you could come up with your own approach. And it didn't really even matter if that approach was especially sophisticated. It's just having your own sound that was the highest level. And just copying somebody else was something you did out of necessity,
right.
But it was a bad thing to do in the long term. That was really only a stepping stone toward coming up with a sound of your own. So that was our dream, and somehow taking all this music and distilling it down to something original. But we wanted to reflect, all of these musicians we love. We wanted to carry that sound forward somehow at the same time. And we're foolish enough to think we could maybe do that somehow. So you were asking,
finding your own
right
was the holy grail.
That was the
holy grail. You
grail.
guys pursued that and found it.
He certainly did, and it was amazing to watch. Especially amazing to watch this person who had a lot of potential as a musician, but was not somebody that anybody paid much attention to, honestly. Even at the conservatory, he was not a star student at the conservatory, and neither there nor in the social circle of us cats. But he was able to really, it was a fascinating process of kind of acknowledging your own strengths and weaknesses, and looking at the things you love and distilling it all down and thinking about it a lot, and having a lot of experiences and trying a lot of different things, and just kind of feeling things out a lot, and creating something beautiful out of all that. It's really a beautiful thing to watch happen.
I had read something you said quite some time ago, that you were trying to emulate Jaco's sound, and you kept doing things that were mistakes, but then you found that those mistakes were you. They weren't really mistakes, it was your own style coming through. Can you talk about that and when you discovered it?
Absolutely. That was a really interesting experience. really my whole life there was this notion that the Holy Grail is really to develop your own thing. But as I got more into Jaco and started to understand his music more and his approach more, I was just so blown away by it that I thought, you know, this is nobody's ever going to do any better than this. Mm-hmm. The best you're going to be able to do is just emulate him and try to do it in a good and respectful way. Mm-hmm. And so that was my point of view when I went in to study with him. That was all there was to do with the bass, was to just play in that style and try to do it well. You know, maybe there were other things you could do, but you know, you at the very least had to be able to understand this very deep and rich world that he had created before you could move on. And so I just worked really hard at copying him and what he did, and as you said, I would play through his pieces, often, you know, with his help and with his pointers. And there were just certain things I just couldn't get. He was never critical about it. He didn't want me to play like him, which was kind of nice. I guess I should have listened to that more from him. But I was just trying to get it right, really. Mm. And you know, there's some things I couldn't get, and you know, that was always those were the wrong things in the music until I finally realized that those mistakes I was making were actually not mistakes. That was me. That I was never going to be able to play like him because I wasn't him. Mm-hmm. And spending time with him was really effective in that process too, because it was obvious we were just such different people. I mean, you know, I could never be the kind of person that he was and shouldn't. Right. And, you know, part of it was that he was suffering so much. I mean, it was just painful. It was so hard on, and there were times when he would say, "Hey, I can give you a lesson tomorrow," and I'd just say, "Yeah, I can't do it," because I just couldn't bear the thought of spending time with him when he was just really a mess. Because it just hurt too much to see somebody like that. And I didn't want to, you know, it made me do a lot of soul searching, because I thought, you know, is this what you have to do? Is this the kind of person you have to be to make really good music? And I definitely came to the conclusion that it's not worth it. Mm. And, you know, I still feel that way, if that is how much pain you have to be in. And he caused other people a lot of pain too. And he gave a lot of people a lot of joy, but there was a lot of people around him he caused a lot of pain. And, you know, I didn't think it was worth it. So yeah, I realized that, you know, that's just not me, and these little reflections, and when I tried to play his music, those things never were going to go away, and they shouldn't, because those little things are me. And so I kind of tried to turn it around and develop those things instead of trying to get rid of them from my music. Trying to develop those things. It tended to be like little phrasing things, tonal things that he did because of the structure of his hands and the structure of his mind. Certain things that he would play. And so I stopped trying to do those few things, and then more and more things that he did. But at the same time, there were things that he did I could do well. And so I tried to hold on to those things. And you know, I always want my music to reflect the enormous respect and appreciation and love that I have for his, you know, amazing accomplishment. But it started to, you know, sort of be more about these other places to go. And spending time with Michael Hedges was great, because he was very much in that mode too, and he loved Jaco, loved him to death, loved him almost as much as I did. But he recognized that there might be other places to go, and so it was really great to have somebody to bounce ideas off and to share things with and try things with. Michael was fearlessly creative, I guess you'd say. Would try all kinds of crazy things. And, you know, I think of myself in somewhat that way too. at the same time that all this was happening, I've kind of always been one of these people who didn't tend to say no to gigs, largely because I couldn't afford it. If anybody offered to pay me anything, I kind of had to take the gig.
At what point did you start experimenting with the hardware of the instrument? Because nobody does what you do, which is part of what makes you so interesting to watch.
Thanks.
And I had listening to your music, if you weren't a technician on a stringed instrument, you'd probably never realize that you are constantly changing your instrument and the strings through hardware augmentation.
Thank you. I'm glad that it's not that clear, because I'm always worried that the techniques will overshadow the music. And
not when you hear it. When watching, it's almost like this whole other world of wow.
Oh, good. Good. I can't say I care for that much about how it looks, but I want it to sound nice, and that's the important thing. There were a lot of different things going on, and I ended up doing a lot of very unusual gigs of all different kinds. I was also very into avant-garde music, so I played a lot of, kind of way out there stuff. I played in a band once where it was myself, a guy who played a whole bunch of stuff that he had mounted on an old wheelchair that he would bang with things, and another guy who dragged a huge chain around on a piece of plywood. So it was pretty,
about right.
Yeah,
New York,
pretty far out there. We were all New York guys, but we did this one in D.C. actually. Yeah, or all 2 gigs we had, I think, for that band. So it was a lot of different kinds of things going on, and just a lot of experimenting, trying different things. At the same time, I met Daryl Anger and Mike Marshall, and I'm not sure they get the credit they deserve for how incredibly creative they were. I mean, almost off the charts, actually, because those guys would just do anything creative. And at the time, they were well known for creating this fusion of jazz and bluegrass, which is really amazing. But I mean, they were just completely fearless creatively. One of the things that really impressed me is they wanted to have this certain kind of band, and Daryl, he's a violinist, he wanted to be the bass player somehow in the band. That was his idea. He wanted to be a bass player somehow.
While you were in the band?
No, I wasn't in this band.
Oh,
it was a band that they had.
Okay.
But he wanted to, do the bass function somehow. So he got a cheap old cello and put flat-wound electric bass strings on it, but still tuned it in fifths like a violin is tuned, so that he could play it, and just played it like a bass, and tuned it. I can't remember even how he tuned it, and just said, okay, I'm a bass player now. And that kind of fearlessness just really impressed me. The important thing is the ideas, and you don't need to have any barriers to your passions, I guess, is what I'm thinking. So that really struck me and made me think more about taking more chances creatively and trying different things, and starting to look at the instrument and different ways the instrument could work. There's this tendency among us bass players to think of that the bass was perfected in 1962 by Leo Fender, with the 1962 Fender Jazz bass was the perfect form, and that it could never get any better than that. And that's there's nothing wrong with that way of thinking. That's a totally fine way of thinking. But there may be other ways to think about the bass, and those other ways may create maybe even as much music as has been created by thinking about the Fender bass of 1962 being the highest pinnacle that can ever be reached.
I hope so, considering you play a 3-octave fretless neck with hip shot detuners everywhere you look.
Yeah, I kind of decided to join that camp and just see, what else was possible, what could be done. And I had always been interested in tuning the bass in unusual ways, and was very discouraged from doing that by my friends and teachers and colleagues, and rightly so. I mean, if you want to play Led Zeppelin tunes, there's no point in, using a tuning different from what they were using. But if you want to do something else, then it might be wise to use different techniques and tools. And one of the things I discovered is, you could tune a bass to anything. I mean, it's such a strong instrument compared to other instruments that, it'll just take all kinds of different altered tunings. And then hanging out with Hedges, he was completely fearless about tuning his guitar. One of the things he did is he was really interested in using these different tunings, and one of the drawbacks of doing that is especially if you use a really low tuning, it decreases the tension on the acoustic guitar, and the acoustic guitar becomes much quieter. So it can be really hard to hear a guitar that's tuned really low. But he was finding ways of playing the acoustic guitar electrically. Really, really innovative ways of doing that, many of which have become standardizations now. That many of the crazy ideas he had when we were poor, starving musicians that he was, cobbling together with duct tape and paper clips have become standard ways of doing things. Kind of bizarre. But because he was able to amplify the guitar, he could found ways to amplify it, to really, really loud levels. In fact, for a while, he was into playing really, really loud. Some of the loudest gigs I've ever played with, just duo gigs with Hedges. He was able to use a lot wider variety of tunings. And to see, that kind of creativity, I mean, I would feel stupid if I didn't try to see if the same kind of lack of limitations could be pursued on the bass. So there was just this wonderful time where I was just around a lot of really creative people. In New York, I'd been around this really dark kind of scene, and the music tended to be very dark and also very chromatic harmonically, not a lot of prettiness in what we were doing in those days. And I kind of got burnt out on that. It kind of started to feel a little, a little like unnecessary, I guess, in some way. I just kind of wanted to, I wanted to play something. I found myself, in those days, wanting to play something pretty and naive. Something that wasn't cynical and heavy and dark. And so kind of moving in that direction. And that didn't go over well in New York. That was not something people wanted to hear there. But I was coming out here a lot, and people here were really interested in that kind of sound. And Hedges also was interested in that sound. He had been doing a lot of contemporary music, a lot of atonal music. So there's no tonal center, there's no home. It's all really dense intellectually, and not a lot of hand-holding in terms of for the listener. And so we both were kind of in this place where we wanted to experiment with music that was, where we didn't feel obligated to do that, where we could go there if we wanted to, but we didn't feel like we had to. And a lot of other people were too. Some of our heroes, Terry Riley, still alive, still making amazing music, still a huge hero, was doing that. Steve Reich also, who was in Terry's band, actually, in Terry's first bands, making amazing music and just a huge hero to us. So that was something that was kind of happening, and we were interested in kind of pulling that into the mix too. Basically, as much as we could get into the mix is what we wanted to do, all these different kinds of sounds. And so little by little, these things just kind of gelled out of all these different approaches and our own abilities and limitations, and just wanting to enjoy it, really, just wanting to have fun at the same time.
When did these hardware augmentations pop in?
Oh, right. So I got interested in all these different tunings that could be used on the bass. And I realized there were so many tunings you can use on a bass. In fact, I often tell people that it's really easy to tune a bass string over the range of about a fifth, and that's 8 notes. And so if you have a 4-string bass and each of the strings can be tuned to 8 different notes, the number of possible tunings that you're going to have on that instrument is going to be 8 times 8 times 8 times 8, which is 4,096. That's a lot of tunings. That's more tunings than possibly than pieces you're going to write in your life.
Right.
So there's a lot of tunings to work with. And so I got interested in the idea of using tunings more dynamically, not having to be just stuck with one tuning for a piece, being able to move through different tunings. And Hedges was really interested in this too, and something we talk a lot about and try different things and try to con guitar builders into coming up with things that would allow us to do this. And most of them thought we were completely insane, in some cases probably rightly so. But when I met Joe Zahn, he was the first guy I talked to who said, "Oh, that's a great idea. We could do that for you." I was shocked. He'd been coming to a lot of my gigs and bringing his lovely instruments. And, he started saying, I'd really like to build you a bass. And I said, I don't think you want to build what I want. And he said, no, try me. And so I said, well, this is what I really want. And was describing something very like the Hyperbass that we made. And he said, oh, yeah, we could do that. I think sometimes he regretted being so open to it. But we started working together in, I think it was 1989, maybe 1990. Started working together on this dream bass. He had a lot of really creative ideas too. And so we said, well, let's just put everything that we can on one instrument and see what happens. And so we started working on this bass that he ended up dubbing the Hyperbass. And it was a real project. My part in it was really easy. It was just coming up with weird ideas. But he had to figure out how to make all these things work. And, it was a lot of things that hadn't been done before. A lot of mechanical challenges, a lot of electronical challenges, a lot of woodworking challenges as well. And he made it all work and put it all together and invented this amazing instrument. And I've been playing that instrument ever since, the Zahn Michael Manring Hyperbass. And it allows me to change tunings in 2 different ways. I can change strings individually or collectively on it. It also has a separate output for each string. So it has a quadrophonic pickup, so I can process the sound of each string separately. In addition, there are pickups in the body, so I can play it almost like an acoustic instrument. I can tap on the body and create sounds, or use those body pickups as an additional sound source. And as you mentioned, it has a very long fingerboard, allows me to play in higher ranges than you can on a normal bass. So, really super, super lucky to run into Joe, and we've had a really close friendship ever since, and he's built a number of other instruments for me. And at this point, that's pretty much all I play is his instruments, because I just love him so much, and he's so good at what he does that it's really been a great partnership.
How has this instrument shaped your playing or your composition and the physical act of playing since you've received it?
It really opens things up. for me, I see it as a logical extension of the bass guitar. I know for a lot of people it seems like something, as you said, from another planet. For me, it's just a logical next step to make. And so, I mean, it's a real blessing to have this tool that has these whole other sets of capabilities. So there's a ton of stuff I haven't done with it yet. There's a lot more that can be done. And there are lots of additional design ideas that we'd like to try that we haven't had the time and money to pursue. So there's an awful lot that needs to be done. And it's just a thrill to be able to pursue these ideas and see where they go. And a number of them have really been very fulfilling. There's a number of things I've done with the Hyperbass in particular. A number of pieces that I've written that I've been playing for 20 years and have just been enormously fulfilling and given me a lot of joy. And other people sometimes seem to like hearing them too. So all the better.
Can you tell me about a career as a solo bassist playing the kind of, I'll call it weird.
Please.
Because that's the function of the site. But weird doesn't necessarily mean bad. It's just somebody being themselves in a way that you don't hear often. Unique is probably a better word, but weird is a good marketing term. Anyway, what is that like for you? As you've made a career of being a weird solo bassist, and bass magazines all over the world write about what you do. How has that been, and is that the direction you ever expected your career to go?
I definitely didn't expect it to happen this way. And all the smart, well-meaning folks around me told me it wasn't going to happen. They all said, you can do a little bit of this solo bass thing, but it's not anything anybody's ever going to be really interested in. And it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a kind of funny thing about a creative world like music. As soon as you think you have a rule, you might be right for that month or that year or even that decade. But if it's a creative world, things are going to change. And it's going to be hard to pin things down. So for me, it's been a real blessing because I just love the instrument so much. And when you play it by itself, you can really hear all of its nuance and all of its color and all the little kind of poetry that goes on with the sounds and all the emotions that it's capable of expressing, and all the ideas, all the intellectual ideas it's capable of expressing, with all of this sound, both subtle and gross, I suppose, that it's capable of. It is, I mean, it's an enormously rich instrument sonically, because all the time it's creating very low sounds and very high sounds all the time, and a lot of sound in the middle as well. So the idea of playing it solo has always been a passion for me. Something always I kept on the back burner for a lot of years, because I was, passionate about playing other kinds of music as well. But the solo thing is something that I could never really give up, because it really is such a beautiful sound, I think, regardless of who's playing it. So overall, it just felt really lucky to have found myself there. Especially after Hedges died, and I didn't have somebody who's that really close friend anymore to play with. Then doing more solo stuff really felt good. I don't know what more I can say on that specific topic, but it really has been a blessing to do that, and And I'm just so thrilled and so thankful that people are accepting of it, because I think it is a bit of a stretch as a listener. You know, when you ask anybody to listen to anything new, people have busy lives, and you know, most people don't want to spend a lot of time on music, and they're stretching their minds so much just to survive in this world. You kind of hate to ask them to stretch them anymore just in listening to music, but there are people who like to do that.
And they're all over the world, and you now have the capability to reach them, which is awesome.
It's amazing. I mean, it really is amazing. So, I mean, that's one of the thrills about it for me, is this kind of music is equally effective in Bogota as it is in Boca Raton. So, you know, you can go all over the world. There's kind of no reason not to play everywhere. So I've had a chance to travel all around and play this crazy music for people, and that's been amazing. I wouldn't have traveled much, I think, myself if I didn't need to, if I wasn't invited to by the music making process. I'm actually kind of a homebody, as I say it. One of the things I enjoy most is just sitting by myself and playing music. But you know, it's just been a great privilege to be able to travel around and have amazing experiences and meet incredible people and see incredible things all over the world. And you know, that bizarre, amazing, wonderful magic of being able to have music connect people. I've played in a couple of bands where no two people spoke the same language, and yet, you know, we could, it's a terrible cliche, but we could communicate through the medium of music. And even though it's a cliche, I never get tired of that magical aspect, one of the many magical aspects of music, of just completely obliterating all kinds of barriers and borders, linguistic and geographic and cultural even.
Well, that is fantastic. I think we need to wrap it up, but I have 100 more questions, so hopefully we can do this again at
I'd
some
love
point
to.
in the future.
Thank you so much for
Thank you,
coming.
Michael. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Cool, thanks.